In regards to last week, when I mentioned the adit, the adits, if you recall, wherein MV12, AMV12, the substance that I in the past referred to, that I named last week, where it is being extracted and used. In fact, I had several questions along the same line. So if I don't read your question, here's your answer. Those of you are a general sketching of it. Each person has, out of the three, a primary adit, wherein the majority of this substance, AMV12, is extracted and used, and it's resulting in what many of you and people throughout history have tried to come up with, of there being types of people. You would be better off, for the time being, to try such a term for your own neuralization, such as consciousness type. Now, it does reveal itself, as many people have suspected. It is not unknown knowledge, although it's never been formalized, and it's never been completely understood, the idea that there is a type of person. And many of you, every year or so, I get new questions about it. And a strong suspicion, which I have yet directly to try and satisfy with any of you, because if you get good enough to begin to ask the questions on a reasonable basis, then you should pursue it. It's how you normally get a response from me. With this feeling that just strikes people, that you see somebody and perhaps it goes through this kind of chord change. You maybe see the person physically from the back and you think, without any analyzation, I know this person. And you turn them around and it's not them. And then that may set off other associations that you begin to think, well, there are certain types of people. I can see the way they move, or I can be watching a television interview and a person will begin to espouse some political view. And as soon as they start, maybe they give it no preference, you just preface to it, you just turn it on, the guys beginning to come out with a very right-wing attitude toward the political system of the world, or his country. And as soon as he starts, it may strike you in such a way, well, I should have known that. Something about the way the man looks. And he doesn't have to just have on a $12 Kmart polyester suit with an American flag. There's just something about his demeanor. There's something about his whole physical presence that you think, yeah, I should have known. And then that can trip off other associations of you believing that I have seen this before. Maybe other politicians come to mind, or maybe even a voice or would-be picture picks out Nero or Attila, and you just know that he would resemble George Wallace. You just know that they'd have something in common. There is a basis to this. But the basis is, or one possible description I'm giving you, is that of the three outlets, the adits, as I was calling them, and each person, under the mechanical wiring system, the way people are at line level, the majority of it is going to come out at one of the adits. And it's not that complicated. The obvious example that I'm already hinting at was if it was primarily being extracted and used at the lowest adit, you would have, to speak very general terms, you would have our Alabama bricklayer. You would have a red circuit man. Several other questions. Somebody even asked me about an animal. I didn't bring the question out, having to do with this substance. So let me add a little to what I did last week. This substance is the unique food to man. It is not in anyone else's blood system. And in fact, in man, everything else that is in the blood, everything else that is in the breath, is serving only the minimal needs of the primal flow. The crudest energy / information / food transfer in the whole body of life. That all of the searching, all of the attempted philosophical approaches to explaining how, indeed, if man is unique, how is he unique? And Of course, the oldest stories, the continuing ones, being that in some way he is a piece of the gods. But there is a physical reality. It is this substance in the blood. And remember, this is also a substance in the blood of life itself. But it is what is unique. When you get past the point of trying to take into consideration everything that would keep humanity alive, everything that would keep a man alive, the absolute minimal requirements that it would take to say this is a living, fairly conscious human being, regardless of any very close shaves in your attempt to describe their intelligence or their sophistication, you would say this person, to a minimal degree, meets the requirements for being human. All right, a millimeter below that would be everything else in the blood, and also everything within the respiratory processes of man, but in this case we're talking about the blood, everything else in there, below that 1 millimeter, you could find parts of it in common with other creatures. But it is this substance that is unique. It is this substance that in truth is the one food for man. And if any of you can chew on this in a certain way, you'll have perhaps another way to look at me trying to point out to some of you in the past rather stringently that there is no ambrosia, to use a lower circuit. And by ambrosia, of course, I have intended to point your direction at the fact that there is no physical magic that will ignite the nervous system, that will sustain the carrying of this substance into higher regions of the nervous system. There is no food, there is no diet, there is no mechanical exercise, there is no chanting, there is nothing that one can do that would normally be fed by any parts of the blood that were depleted of this substance. There's nothing you can do at that level that will in some way bring about magic or enlightenment, mystical states. All of that is dependent upon this substance reaching above the line of this getting into the higher areas of the brain. Now, it does seem, some of you should have been able to put this together by now, from your own reading, and by now being able to read the history of man in your own nervous system, that the kinds of things in which rather ordinary people have been involved, of attempting to fast until the point that they begin to hallucinate, or even if you weren't doing all your cramming on the weekend like some of you admitted, people trying to stay up, deprive themselves of sleep. You can approach something that could pass for an Alabama mystical state after 3 or 4 days. Or people who attempt to sit down in one position and to say the name of Allah or some God, to breathe in and out, and with each breath to say it over and over, and try and put themselves in some sort of trance, to put themselves in some sort of unusual mystical condition. When it does seem to have an effect, of course, like everything else, what has happened has been a biochemical alteration within the system. But since that knowledge has never been available, since it was not necessary, we're back to all of the old stories that if and when such a thing happens and it's over, people have had no recourse other than to say, I have been in the foyer of the gods. Something mystical, something beyond the physical realm has happened. And it's not true. That some of this substance, rather than being depleted in its old manner, in the way in which that particular person was already wired up, some of it got into the brain where it doesn't belong. And a corollary to this, that surely some of you have already tried to stick it together, is how some of the so-called hallucinogenic drugs work. It is all a chemical reaction. One more back to last week. If you recall, I pointed out that you should attempt now, I was using as the primary example last week, the idea of the 3 forces and the numerous names that I had put on them. and pointed out to you that you should henceforth just abandon any voice, any inclination inside of you that seems to have any knowledge, any prior observation, any apparent understanding of it, and to abandon that, to act as though you did not know anything about it, and then start attempting to put the modes on it. That, all right, this appears to be everything that you now understand. Some quite clear voice says this obviously has to be whatever he's always meant by a D-force. Just everything about it, it fits. Is to abandon that, not question it, but just abandon whether that be true or not. And go ahead and operate on the assumption that your observation, that the voice's observation is not totally fallacious. But then try and find a mode to put on it. Like to me pointing out that that which on one level could appear to be a D inclination at work could also be in a different mode. It could be what would appear to be D in a kinetic mode or D in a recoiling mode. That which apparently is destructive is not quite that simple. Or that which in fact appears to be creative or constructive is not quite that simple. Continued. That was the heading of this paragraph. And then continued was the end of it. Colon. All right, you should not simply leave that at the three forces of that idea. You should try and attempt and to approach everything on the basis that I do not understand, I don't know anything about this. And it has nothing to do with the fact as to whether you do or not. Because what very few of you have yet to have a clear understanding of, I guess some of you may get something as soon as I put words on it, anything in you that can speak with an already established and recognizable voice, anything in you that can speak on the basis, whether it uses these words or not, of course, is up to your own observation, but on the basis that I understand this, is the incorrect party speaking. That any voice in you that goes, oh yes, I understand that conveys that message to your screen of consciousness, then that one speaking, rest assured, does not understand it. And so what I'm describing to you in truth has nothing to do with the fact as to whether you actually understand anything about this. And so what you're attempting to do is abandon any voices, any messages that are coming out of, oh yes, I understand this, because whatever be the source of that message, you can count on that source being somewhere in the vicinity of Disneyland. To keep our continuing new dictionary going, since this sounds so vague, let's put a name on it. How about dynamic ambiguity? I started to say I like it, but I like all of them I come up with at the time I come up with them. So until further notice, if you would like to consider it in that manner, dynamic being see if we trust my memory vis-a-vis the dictionary, forceful and are pertaining to change. And ambiguity being indistinct, ambiguous even being inexplicable, except what you've got to remember in this case, and the way in which I'm attempting to describe it as being inexplicable, is in regards to ordinary consciousness. So that the wiring, the voices within you that would say, I understand this, which are, of course, the same voices that say, I do not understand this. But anything that presents the message that I understand this is to be ignored and operate as though I do not know anything about this. And so it would be, to at least suit my present purposes, it would be a form of dynamic ambiguity. of being, of course this takes a specific intention to do it, but it would be an active, a forceful attempt to be indistinct. So in everything that you thought, that the voices thought that you understood, anything that has an absolute, immediate, direct, regardless of how it seems to be colored, but opinion, but yes, I know all about this, or no, I don't know anything about this, or this is to be avoided, or tut-tut on this. It's to act as though you don't know anything about it. Is it time 4 months into the year to point out to everyone that all of this, remember, is trickery? If this in some way was solemn, if this in some way was stable, then I would get me a robe and we'd do a new version of the cutting of commandments on stone, because it's trickery. But enough of you are getting close to such as this. Enough of you are getting close enough to realize that what appears to be the unbelievably complex, that which apparently is in contradiction to itself, is where reality lies. That anything that is certain at the ordinary level should be highly suspect. Or else why do I keep changing subtly the rules of the game? Having already mentioned an aspect of the uniqueness of man, let me give you a question. What is it truly that makes man unique? And don't leave it at just what I pointed out about the particular substance in the blood. Now, if I had to lump all that life has talked to itself about through humanity in regards to the apparent uniqueness, the claimed uniqueness of man, I guess one of the safest words would be his spirit. That in history, philosophy, and in religion, variations of this idea that there is something in man, that life is spoken through quite ordinary and sometimes unordinary men that would look upon other creatures and say there is something unique about man. Not simply his opposable thumb, not simply language, but there is something else that I truly smell is unique about man, and then it comes down to, in some way, it's his spirit. And of course the religions get into, it's a spark of the gods. But it seems to be something that no one can define what it is. So let me ask you a question. What is it? How many people had voices that would say, well, it's the yellow circuit? Is it? Time's up? No. How about this? It is the singular combination of the circuits and the infrasystems. See if you can turn all that into spirit. I'm going to get on some of the questions. What is happening when things seem to get complicated? Everything perhaps can be seen as complicated and are simple, but why do often simple seeming activities grow increasingly complicated? Let me remind you, since we do this periodically, and you people who may get this in another place at another time, as I periodically put up a note before the meeting starts, and we're back to playing pseudo-psychology, pseudo-sociology, pseudo-social commentary, that I invite and encourage everyone here periodically that whatever questions have seemed to be plaguing your little storehouse, instead of trying to find ways to put it in terminology I might use, or just apologize and say this is not a big problem with me, or I understand that this is a kind of suffering and I shouldn't be doing it, is it's like time out, it's like Mardi Gras periodically, to go ahead and write the questions, whether you attribute it to your own position or just what you observe, and then I take it and answer it one way or another, or say something about it. God forbid I should answer it. There is a place for this, and I'm not giving out answers. It is not an answer, it is not the answer. But when we use this, what I am attempting to do, since I've never really explained it in this way, I'll go ahead and give it a quick attempt, and hopefully it will not totally succeed, or else I will have failed. Is along lines of me responding in some manner, sort of like a person might, were they not engaged in this. And I don't mean, of course, just mechanically, not caught up with the same kind of observation or so-called problem a person had, but if someone's consciousness was ignited beyond the ordinary level, well, all of this seems to be proper or improper, which is the same thing. Seems to be serious, but it may be attempting to get you to look in a certain way or to paint sometimes these semi-humorous pictures in my response, that if you were not operating at that level, it might be seen in this general way. So having cleared that up, why is it that often simple seeming activities grow increasingly complicated? All right, that is a valid observation, and I could point this out. That as life draws any human activity closer to its expanding bosom, the more complex it always becomes. If it does not become more complex, it dies. I'm just using the person's, well, complicated is the word they use. I can use that. I could use other words, but I'll stick with the way the person asked it. Anything that is going to become, to any length of time, long enough for it to become an area to be questioned, to be studied, has become a part of life's own body for some period of time. It will always, from an ordinary viewpoint, become more complicated. I can give you what should be a one prime area, and that is religion. To take any religious idea, any religious movement, and it can be seen from one view, just take it historically, ignoring any qualms, any questions of the validity of it, just what would appear to be the original appearance of some person, some group of people, what was obviously the central core of what was the message. If it's going to survive, and it had to survive or you wouldn't have heard of it by now, it goes from being what can be seen as a rather simple, direct statement of some kind. It could be wrapped up in a sentence or two, or if you were good at it, perhaps in one word. But if it's going to survive, it's going to become as complex, as complicated as General Motors. That's simply the way it goes. And of course, also parts of what is in the body of life to help things be able to grow and to have its resistance, as you have throughout history, people speaking for another area of life and condemning this and criticizing it. That look at the church now, it's more of a money maker. They own more real estate than does Mobil Oil. And it started out with a simple message: love thy fellow man. And now, if somebody tried to say love thy fellow man, it would take 2 years. They'd have to appoint a council. They'd have to bring in all the cardinals and the sparrows and everyone, and they'd have to vote on it. And so they take that as being, or they present it as being a kind of criticism. But there is no way out of that. I said that I consider that to be a prime example, but you can find any number of them. Not just in religion. You can find it in areas that just seems to be the mores of society. You can find it in science. Anywhere you look, you can just pick out an area and you can see, if assuming you can see, you can taste it, you can see it into the past, that this started out and was rather simplistic. And now look at it. It looks like something that was put together by a deranged committee. And now you could not get back to the core of it. They would deny it as going, in fact, against its general principle, maybe. Then if you get real, real good, Then, of course, you bring it to the most important era of historical study, and that is your life. Anything that has become a continuing part of you, whether it seems to be a hobby, or if you want to get real dirty, that which now seems to be part of your wired-up personality, part of your habitual behavior. You can find at one spot that it started off, and it could be described in most simplistic, direct terms. That at that level, if we were playing psychology, some voice in you could say, well, I can recall when I first got interested in that, and I thought, all right, I'm going to devote certain kinds of time, certain kinds of effort at this, and I will accomplish such and such. And now look at it. At one time I thought, how about this one? This will get some of you, if it's too vague. I thought, within me back when I was nice and common, that I wanted to be a musician. Not just pick on the guitar, but I thought I had something even to say. I had such piercing insights into the folly of human nature that all I have to do is have a little exposure and sing my sarcastic, biting songs, and people would fall out of chairs going, my God, I see the light, or else they'd go away suffering over being such fools. But at any rate, I would sit down and I would write these, and I'd sketch them out on a little notebook paper, and I even learned how to write enough music that maybe I could get it copyrighted. And let's just say it continues along certain lines, and then 10, 15 years later, someone says, are you still interested in music? I remember when you used to sit around your little apartment there, and you would stay for hours at a time. You'd lock yourself in there for several days, and we'd hear you in there picking and humming, and you seemed to enjoy it so much. Did you ever do anything with it? I'm still working on it. And then you find the person now, instead of this $10 guitar they had to begin with, that seemed quite adequate, that seemed to fit right in, that seemed to fuel the dreams at the time, they now having to work 2 jobs to pay off the debts on 4 different guitars and different tunings, the amplification system they have. Perhaps now they have gone in debt, $2,000 or $3,000 for a tape deck so they can make a good demo. I mean, I'm not going to get anywhere. I finally decided that. I realized I can't go around here with this $10 guitar and stopping people or go up to CBS Records in New York and just knock on the door and say, let me come in and sit on the edge of your couch and I'll pick a couple of numbers and you'll love it. No. To do this thing right, at any rate, it's now completely out of hand from one viewpoint. That is so complicated, can you see that the system itself almost has become a kind of systematic problem? That the system now, what I was attempting to do is become its own problem. I can't get out from under it. I could not sit down now and take off a weekend and sit around and try to write some new songs. I've got to go out and play this junk music I don't like to keep up the payments on all my recording equipment and my new guitars. If things survive within the body of life and within your body of life, they become mechanically more complicated. That is the nature of the life, the body of life's own life. It is being suggested and theorized, as many of you should have, I'm sure, have read, that is one description that they keep trying to piece together as they get more and more into the particle world, that surely if there was one big instant when everything went pow and came out of the primal flow, or their big bang, their great cosmic swamp, that it surely started off in a rather, at least relatively speaking, simplistic fashion, but it had to become more and more complex. There had to be more complex arrangements of proteins. It had to grow, instead of things being almost in a symmetrical way, that there was maybe just this one thing, or just one group of proteins. It had to start getting out of balance. It had to become asymmetrical. Parts of the universe had to become hotter than others. It, in a word, became very complicated, or else it would not have expanded. Their theories are the truth, but you can find it within you. The observation that it becomes more complicated is a correct observation. On a next question, on a horizontal level, is it always necessary for there to be, quote, irritation for civilization to advance? Is this thing in this thing can irritation be of any use in this kind of activity was the second part of the question. Let me try this. I'm going to refer you back to the growth of life in the ordinary mechanical sense is always a matter of rebellion. In another particular way, this is absolute rebellion. This is rebellion squared. And rebellion is always an irritant to the established order. Rebellion is an irritant in you. Attempting to change is an irritant. That's part of the purpose I serve. And who is going to ever do this unless you had somebody like me? Who would even listen to it? I mean, it's obvious you'd never thought of it. I assume all of you have been disavowed or disabused of that. Some of you it took a little while, and some of you I know still have voices. I see them look at me periodically. On a bad night that you look at me, and it's like you're trying to figure out, what did I stumble on? What's the trick? Because you're so damn smart. You've been around so much, you've had so many strange thoughts, that there's got to be one little trick, and if you could just figure out what it is that I have done, you could do it, and fuck all this. You cannot create your own rebellion. But with rebellion is always irritation. And their question, is irritation always necessary for civilization to advance? Yes. But let's put it in a broader sense. Anytime I'm using it, I'll take their use of the word advance, to expand. The whole business of us being here, the whole business of life having humanity in its nervous system, is for it to, I'll go ahead and use advance. But nothing advances unless something gets stepped on. Nothing grows unless something is eaten. Nothing grows unless something has been turned into fertilizer. Nothing gets built unless something is torn down and turned into new building materials. And from the viewpoint of that which becomes fertilizer, from the viewpoint of that which gets torn down and turned into bricks or 2x4s, I would say, speaking for trees, animals, if I may, if they could come back, I'm sure that they would not disagree with the term if I said, you find this to be an irritation. And I'm sure that any sane oak tree or any sane pine tree, considering its fate of being cut down and stripped and run through a planer, would probably say, this meets the minimum requirement of being an irritation. This, in particular, the other part of their question, in this thing, can irritation be of any use? It's not can it be of any use. Without irritation, there is nothing. Without irritation, this would become, any of you who really recall some time back when I pointed out that it was on a very low level at the time, trying to get you to distinguish to yourself about certain inclinations you had that you believed should be the way to pursue some kind of unusual activity, when I described it as being the rocky road versus the sandy path. Part of my use of the term sandy path would be that which is almost sans irritation. Unintentional, almost pun, that's S-A-N-S instead of S-A-N-D-S. But that which is not irritating, which, as an aside, I might point out to you, when you get into the, refer back to the multi-storied corporation of everyone, when you get into the so-called world of socio-economic strata, when you get into the upper, they've always had a religion floating around that is almost without irritation. I guess in the Western world it'd be the Episcopal Church. If you're going to run an Episcopal church, there's one thing if you're going to be an Episcopal priest. I've never been to any of their theological schools, but I can assure you that one way or other, since justice prevails, only certain types are already drawn there, so don't worry about cause and effect. But the message gets through to everyone that the primary things to be an Episcopal